Hey guys, it's the Melblade 5, and at least as far as video games are concerned, this year has kicked off with a big bang. Because on my end, January already saw the release of one of my most anticipated games of the year, Tekken 8. What began as something that I was very much looking forward to in much the same manner as any new game in a series I'm a fan of all the way back during that first teaser, quickly snowballed into far more hype with every bit of marketing from then on. Not just from the obvious improvements over Tekken 7 that could be seen immediately, but also from going above and beyond just that by how crazy you could tell this game's direction was going to be. The amazing visuals, the cool new looks for many of the characters, all the new features to the gameplay, how much genuinely cool fan service and callbacks they managed to include, and the biggest telltale sign of all this for me was that they brought back June in her first canon game appearance since Tekken 2. Within this new renaissance trend with fighting games recently, Tekken 8 was by far the one that grabbed my attention the most with its own innovations, to the point that I developed an almost unhealthy obsession with anticipating its release. I didn't just watch every single trailer for this game, I watched practically every piece of marketing they put out for it. This is the most hyped I have ever been for a fighting game. I even pre-ordered the game almost a month in advance because I was so looking forward to it. As such, I kind of already knew I wanted to make a video on it following its release. I don't care if I've only really talked about Tekken a handful of times on this channel, I need to express all my thoughts on this game. And by the time it finally came out and I got to play it myself, it was everything that I hoped it would be, and so much more. So for a bit of context, long story short, after Tag Tournament 2 didn't sell very well, Namco severely lowered the budget for Tekken 7, which resulted in a game that, while having great gameplay, was held back in a lot of areas by those budget restrictions. Personally, I didn't even play that much of 7. Not that I disliked it or anything, just that where it was held back did have an influence on how much of it I could really play and actively enjoy. But thanks to 7 being a huge commercial success both in its initial launch and onwards, Namco gave the Tekken team a far higher budget this time around, and 8 really shows that on all fronts. The first of which you can tell from just a glance, being the graphics. I'm not normally one to discuss graphics since gameplay is the most important factor, but I'd be doing a huge disservice if I didn't mention how incredible this game looks. Everything looks so realistic and detailed without sacrificing any of the series' visual style, and the CG cinematics are even more detailed. Especially after 7's graphics were pretty subpar for 8th gen console standards, coming from that to this is like night and day. This just might be one of the most visually stunning games I've ever played. And a lot of this praise also extends to the character designs, as everyone got a huge glow up here, with many of them also getting some drastic makeovers that I found to be welcome updates to their looks, such as Yoshimitsu getting his coolest look yet. And even as someone who was never a big fan of the Jack designs in past games, I must say, Jack 8 looks sick. Even though I wasn't too stoked on at first, like Lee in his new battle suit rather than his usual fancy clothes, soon grew on me. So in summary, I really like all the fighters' designs, as much of a hot take that might be for some people. But now onto the gameplay, the real meat of it all. The core theme of Tekken 8's gameplay is aggression, with one of the main features promoting said theme being the new heat mechanic. Heat is a temporary power-up usable once per round wherein the fighter's moves are buffed in a variety of ways. The most apparent being all their moves causing more chip damage, even when the opponent is blocking. So even against opponents purely on the defensive, you're still contributing towards whittling down their health. And while you're attacking, the heat meter's depletion pauses. So the more aggressive you are, the longer your heat state lasts for. While in heat state, you can also perform dash cancels to better extend combos, or use a heat smash as the replacement for rage drives from 7, both at the cost of the rest of the heat gauge. I try to only use these at the last possible second so I can get the most out of heat while still taking advantage of them. But it can still be something to fall back on if things start to turn south. You can either activate heat manually or have it automatically activate after performing certain moves. The latter giving you more time in the heat state, so I tend to focus on using that method, but having the option of the former is still good if you really need heat quickly in a pinch to start a counteroffensive. There's surprisingly quite a bit of depth to this mechanic with all the different ways of how and when to use it, and was usually the catalyst for me making a comeback when struggling against some harder fights. Oh, and as for all that chip damage, you can recover that health by hitting your opponent, further promoting that aggressive playstyle, which is perfect for my sometimes button mashing and forgetting to block in stressful situations self when it comes to fighting games. Yet that approach still only gets you so far, so it certainly doesn't reward playing like that. And having rage as well unintentionally promotes the theme of aggression even more with it raising your attack power, alongside the strategic side with the return of rage arts, which also received a huge improvement. Rage arts in 7 were mostly just a series of simple punches and kicks. Now here, they are far more dynamic and over the top to put them on par with equivalent super moves from other fighting games. Even the characters who don't have any powers or such are still given really flashy attacks that simply just look really cool to watch and satisfying to pull off. And I don't know about you, but even outside of Rage, attacks feel like they do a lot more damage here. All that combined makes the combat so exciting, rewarding, and frankly addicting to play. I was initially confused why they had it set to needing 3 rounds to win the match, so I set it back to 2 because I was more used to that. Then I soon realized why they did it. Cause with this approach, the fights end so quickly, so I switched it back to have just the right length while still keeping things fast-paced. As I finish what I commit to being the last fight before doing something else, I often think, maybe just one more. As for how the characters themselves play, I don't know if it's my skills possibly getting a tiny bit better over the years, but I found myself playing really well for my standards with many of the characters I've properly put time into playing as, which is just another way that it feeds back into the gameplay feeling so fun and addicting. I feel like I have some decent skill for once. Of course, I still find myself gravitating towards the characters I've always been good as, like Brian and Dragonov, but to my surprise, I also find myself quickly getting good with some characters who I never really played as in previous games. The most notable case of this would have to be Elisa. I was never good with her before, but in this game, her chainsaws do so much chip damage and heat, and I've been able to pull off some decent combos with her, so she just clicked with me here. In general, I think most characters got great updates to their movesets to make them feel that much more distinct from one another. Not to mention all the cool nods they managed to include. Even more out there ones, like Lars's rage art being a reference to when he was randomly playable in that one Naruto game. Similarly, they made a lot of unique intro animations for matchups between characters with a pre-established relationship or some sort of theme. I appreciate the effort of them going the length to do that, as little extras like that really help to flesh out the cast further by showing more of their personalities. But since we're on the subject of characters, I kind of have to address the elephant in the room regarding one of the 3 newcomers in this game. Raina. I wasn't sure what to think of this character when going off the leak of her that everyone and their grandmother saw whether they wanted to or not, with it spoiling the revelation that she's Heihachi's daughter. I wasn't a huge fan of the idea, seeing as they'd already done the secret illegitimate Mishima kid idea for a fighter with Lars, and what I pictured of essentially a female Heihachi didn't look that appealing. Then when she was officially revealed, all that changed. She shares some moves with Heihachi, but she also has many original moves that give her a completely different playstyle. So she ended up becoming my favorite of the newcomers conceptually. I just wish I could get good with her. Victor's the newcomer I'm the best at playing as so far. Outside of Versus, there's still various other modes to do. The biggest reason why I didn't play much of 7 was because there was hardly any single player content, which left me with almost nothing to do outside of getting my ass kicked online by people who are way better than me. Now they've gone a complete 180 and given so much more for me to do before I can feel confident enough to make that jump online. They even brought back Tekken Ball! And it's still just as ridiculous as it looks. The main new single-player mode is the Arcade Quest, where, in a world filled with Xbox avatars, you must hone your skills in the arcades and rise up the ranks to become the champion of the in-game Tekken World Tour. It's essentially a long tutorial with a mostly hands-off approach to help you learn the different types of moves and put them into practice against the AI. Which is fine for what it's supposed to be, and it, alongside the other incredibly helpful practicing tools available, is likely another factor as to why I feel I've gotten a tiny bit better now. Though I have found the AI to occasionally spike in difficulty out of nowhere regardless of their rank. This mode also leans into the new Ghost Battle feature, wherein you can create your own AI that adapts and learns from you to mimic your playstyle. I haven't put much time into this mode myself, since I'd be the worst teacher for the ghost and would hate to see how poor I still am compared to others be reflected in the game, but it's still very impressive at how accurate and quick it is at learning and evolving in real time. And of course, there's arcade modes with the classic formula of making it through a series of fights to challenge the boss at the end. Though oddly, they kept the same approach from 7, where being arcades doesn't give you that character's ending. They brought back the character episodes from that game and tied the endings to those again, which I didn't really like because it kind of makes arcade feel pointless outside of just grinding for money, and it does make the process of unlocking a character's ending feel a bit less triumphant than before. Though I will say, I do think they greatly improved the character episodes in this game, so that isn't too much of a complaint. They're a little longer now, so they are more like a slightly shorter arcade this time. But the biggest improvement is definitely the endings themselves. 7's were just these brief in-game cutscenes that felt very hollow for the most part. Now we have the return of CG endings with their own brief what-if storylines, and they're just as good as they've ever been. In fact, it seems like there are a lot more goofy, comedic endings here than what you'd usually see in the mainline games, which is fine by me. I've always loved the wackier side of Tekken as well, since it reflects how much fun the development team has making them and is equally fun to see them be self-aware of how ridiculous the series is. And these endings, alongside all the other ridiculous elements elsewhere, shows that that side is on full display once again. These endings actually remind me a lot of Tag Tournament 2's, which I think had the most wacky and off-the-wall endings in the franchise. Like, in Lee's ending, he basically becomes Iron Man, which is exactly why I made this crappy Iron Man costume for him. Which takes me over to the customization. I never got much out of customization in past games due to a combination of lacking much creativity at the time and feeling restricted by what options were available. While I do wish 8's clothing had some more variety, since much of it is like casual street clothes, I've still been able to pull off many of the dumb ideas for costumes I can come up with. So I found myself using it a lot more, such as making Magician Claudio, and costumes based on various other sources in the same vein as many others have shared online. The last part of the game I wanted to cover is the story. To beat the dead horse one last time, Tekken 7's story mode was one I felt had a lot of ambition behind its core themes, but was really underwhelming in its execution. It was presented in a very dull manner, only about a third of the roster actually appeared in the story, and even then some contributed nothing, and a lot of how the story actually panned out felt very half-baked to me. And yet again, 8 completely blows it out of the water. It's not perfect, but I felt so invested and got so much enjoyment from experiencing it that any blemishes I can think of feel like nitpicks in comparison. 6 months after he killed Heihachi at the end of the last game, Kazuya continues to fan the flames of World War III, with the goal of global control to rebuild the world into one where only the strong survive. To that end, he opens the next King of Iron Fist tournament to decide which fighters and countries get to live on in his new world. And after waking up from his power nap, Jin is the one person standing the best chance at defeating Kazuya. Right off the bat, the lack of characters issue from before is improved upon as everyone is here. Some obviously have more screen time than others, and there are a few who I think could have done more, but I appreciate that they managed to have every character show up nonetheless. Similarly, I also really like that we actually get to see the tournament pan out, from the qualifiers to the first round of the tournament itself. As ever since Tekken 4, the tournament happened more in the background to the actual story. So I like that it does play a role here in the setup for Kazuya's grander plans. And you even get to pick who wins the first round fights, which I thought was a cool touch. So all the conflict from the tournament allows Kazuya to break the seal on Azazel from Zafina in order to straight up resurrect Azazel. Which really caught me off guard when they suddenly threw in a battle against the cheapest boss in Tekken history in the middle of all this. Thus, defeating Azazel allows Kazuya to merge with him to become True Devil Kazuya, which now makes him the new cheap boss, complete with some of Azazel's moves, who even some of the most skilled and powerful fighters stand even less of a chance of winning against. Then when we get to the big battle sequence between the Rebels and G-Corp, it suddenly turns into the Tekken Force mode. which also took me by complete surprise, but it was still a cool throwback that helped to really emphasize how big of a battle this is supposed to be, rather than limiting it to a couple of regular fights and having all the conflict occur in the background. This is the part where I think they really get to show off the rest of the cast. Characters who normally wouldn't contribute to the story due to not being Mishimas or having any connections to them. So I thought it was awesome and surreal to see them really be more proactive and take part in the conflict. And you get to play as quite a few different characters in the sequence to face off against many of the bad guys who have allied with G-Corp. As well as Azucena, cause she's perfectly fine with the world getting fucked as long as G-Corp will advertise her coffee brand, and Law just because he was pissed that Paul didn't share the prize money with him. The prize money that he didn't even win. This chapter was utterly nuts and was one of my highlights of the story. The other being everything else after it, as Jin both figuratively and literally faces his inner demons. After hoping for it for so long, I loved that they gave Jin his much-needed redemption arc after being the one who started World War III in the first place. Through his confrontation with his devil form, he defies the Mishima bloodline's self-fulfilling prophecy of causing conflict and destruction that he became entangled in before. Now beginning to truly focus on protecting those he cares for and assuring he and them can live on and look forward to the future as his way of atoning for his sins. I love how the story puts such a strong emphasis on the good in Jin and his care for others that he previously sacrificed because his burdens and self-loathing made him resort to isolating himself. The side of Jin's character that I think a lot of people and other media often ignore and think of him as just some angsty edgelord. With this, Jin pulls a Persona 4 and accepts his devil form, granting him complete control over the devil gene. And it felt so fulfilling to see Jin now relieved from his curse. The amount of throwbacks, well-executed fanservice, and surreal development that I never thought I'd ever see, I find very reminiscent of Devil May Cry 5, as that was one of the many things I loved about that game. And it only gets better from there. As we head to the final battle, and he receives a vision of Jun to encourage him, Jin now combines his devil gene with the Kazama family's power purification to become Angel Jin. If it wasn't for how invested I already was in the impending fight, I would have been jumping up and down with excitement from how cool this moment was. After all this time, Jin finally gets his equivalent to the power of nothingness, on top of this sick form that looks like a Final Fantasy summon. Whilst the final battle immediately gets even more awesome and absurd as Jin and Kazuya's fight takes them all the way to space! Yet in spite of this crazy setup and the tremendous power trip I felt getting to play as Angel Jin, True Devil Kazuya is still a cheap boss. It took me so many attempts to finally beat him, but once I did, it felt so satisfying. But it still isn't over. As they clash, the power purification works to cleanse both of them of the devil gene. Being brought back down to Earth, it's time for the real climax. No demonic powers, just man to man. With Jin switching back to the Mishima and Kazama fighting styles to further show how he's no longer denying his past and lineage, and how it shall no longer burden him as he looks to the future. While a badass remix of his Tekken 3 theme and later the game's main theme blast in the background to make it even more hype, Kazuya has to ruin the moment by continuing to kick my ass. After many more fails, once I got to the final phase, the most crucial part of the fight, I pulled it off on my first attempt without any assistance. I achieved the good ending where Kazuya is finally defeated, and everything can now be at peace as Jin can at last live his life while Jun mysteriously appears by Kazuya's body. Then we return to Raina, where they follow up on that ominous moment from before as she awakens her devil form. So you're telling me that Heihachi just happened to shag another woman with the devil gene? What are the odds? To echo a sentiment that many others have expressed, Tekken 7 walked so that Tekken 8 could run, jump, and fly into the stratosphere, reaching the franchise's full potential that I've always wanted to experience. Practically every part of this game is so exceptionally crafted, on top of how amazing the gameplay is at its center, that when it's all put together, It truly feels like a love letter to the whole series and the fans. It's only been just over a week since the game came out at the time of writing, and I've already put far more hours into it than I did with Tekken 7 in its entire lifespan. This now takes the cake as the most fun I've ever had playing a fighting game. And it's because of all that fun that I feel encouraged to continue playing for a long time coming. To hone my skills to the point that I might actually consider myself good, to experience all the DLC that's yet to come, and while it's kind of dumb to already be thinking about future games, to get excited for the likely Tekken 9 many years from now, since I'm already so invested to see where the story and gameplay can go from here, and I'll be right behind it to get ready for the next battle.